Ashley Vanderberg, and my husband, Michael Vanderberg, was killed in a motor vehicle accident on December 6th, 2016. It was a night that I'll never forget. He and my 3 children were in our minivan coming back from my son's basketball game, and a man ran a red light who we found out later was an impaired driver, and he hit our van. And I was actually in school, and I had gotten a phone call from my daughter, and she said, "Mama, we've been in a wreck." And I immediately became fearful, not sure what was going to happen next. And I said, "Are y'all okay?" And she said, "Our airbags deployed." And she said, "Me and my brother and sister are okay, but we can't get Daddy to wake up." And of course, we began praying, and I was at my parents' house at the time, and we drove to the hospital and found the worst, that my husband had been killed in the accident. And from that point forward began a journey that's been over the last 16 months where we would learn more about the justice system than we ever felt like we would ever need to know. You know, for those of us who abide by the laws and who try to do what's right, I really had no idea what this process would be like. And so we were sitting in the hospital. Of course, I had to tell my children that their daddy had passed away, and before long, a few men from the highway patrol came and told us that the man who had ran the red light was in fact an impaired driver. You know, honestly, it didn't even cross my mind up until then that someone who was so heavily intoxicated would have caused the wreck. I really just felt like it would be an accident. But from that point began figuring out this part of the judicial process and what this would be like for our family. So my husband, Mike, passed away on Tuesday, and we had his receiving and his funeral that weekend, and then by that next week, we had made contact with Mr. Lerner's office, and we began to go through the process of kind of figuring out what was going to happen next. And I've never even been in the courthouse in Newton, so whenever we came that day, it was very scary, and even having to go through the metal detectors and trying to figure out which courtroom we were supposed to be in, because that was also going to be the defendant's first day in court. But Mr. Lerner had said for us to come to his office, which we did, and it was, you know, my whole family. Of course, my children didn't come, but my parents, my in-laws, and we all came, and Mr. Lerner set us around a big round table, and he had lots of people there that we now are friends with, just because we had to learn who all these people were, and we had to figure out what the justice system was going to be like and how it was going to work for us, because we didn't know, and I had no idea about structured sentencing. I didn't know anything about the defendant's prior records. I didn't know any of that until that day. But we sat at that big round table, and we were able to ask lots of questions that were all answered professionally and timely, even if it probably wasn't what we would have liked to have heard. Because I feel like in a situation like that, you feel like that no time, you know, will be enough, that what's been taken from you will never be good enough. There could never be a restoration that would take place. And so we sat around, and we learned about all those things and what the process would be like, and everybody was just so tenderhearted and compassionate towards us. Everyone in Mr. Lerner's office really, I felt like, genuinely cared about us, about my children, about my family. And from that point, we began to learn about how the judicial process would work. And, you know, right after the accident happened, we found out that the defendant was going to be charged with second-degree murder. And I had some friends that have been in law enforcement, and because of my limited knowledge of what was happening, I asked a lot of people, and of course people in the community talked about our case and expressed their condolences to us, and so I of course shared that the defendant had been charged with second-degree murder, and a lot of my friends, even in law enforcement, said, don't get your hopes up that that's going to stick, because I don't see how they can really charge him with second-degree murder unless they can prove malice and really know that he intentionally did this by his use of alcohol. But when I mentioned that to Mr. Lerner and I said, do you really feel like he'll be charged with second-degree murder, or will you give him a lesser plea? Is that an option? And Mr. Lerner told me, he said, he will either plead guilty to second-degree murder or we will go to trial. Those are the only two options. And every time somebody would tell me, oh, that won't stick. He won't plead guilty to second-degree murder, I would say, no, Mr. Lerner told me personally that he will either plead guilty to second-degree murder or we will go to trial. And I just kept playing that over and over in my mind because I really felt like I wanted that in order for justice to be served in Mike's death. And so that's exactly what happened. As we got through the part that took the longest, of course, was whenever we had to send off the blood in order to have the blood tested of the defendant, which we found out was a 0.27. I didn't even know I don't drink, so I didn't even know the legal limit for what alcohol was. I had to Google it, and when I found out that he was over 3 times above the legal limit, then I knew that was really bad, and that there had been negligence on the part of the restaurants where he had dined that night because he was so intoxicated at the time of the accident. And so we had to wait in order to get the blood from Raleigh, and that takes quite a process. Like, I didn't even know how long that would take, but it took quite a while in order for us to get the information back, so that we did verify, yes, that malice was present and that someone with a blood alcohol count that high does use their vehicle in a malicious way. And so once we received that information back from the state, then we found out, yes, that second degree murder was the right charges, and that we were able to take that and know that justice was going to be served for Mike. And then finally, right around September, I remember it actually, Mike's birthday would have been September the 7th, which was on a Thursday. And that very next day, on September the 8th, we got a call that the defendant desired to plead guilty. And so we had the struggle of emotions of trying to figure out what would be the best case scenario for us. And so I spoke with my in-laws, I spoke with our parents, and we really felt like that in order for justice to be served, that we would like for him to have to serve at least 15 years. And so based on the way structured sentencing works in the state of North Carolina, there's kind of a low, medium, and high. I can't even really remember what the different ranges are, but we really wanted him to serve time in the high range because he had been a repeat offender. And so I gave my wishes, knowing that my wishes really didn't matter that much. In the grand scheme of things, I wasn't the one who got to choose the sentence. But the fact that I even got a voice to say what I would have liked meant a lot to me. And so when we went that day, we really felt like that we would like for him to serve time in this higher range. And thankfully, we were able to speak and we were able to talk to the judge. Mr. Lerner actually represented us that Monday when we went to court, and he was able to recap the story, and he was able to tell the judge exactly what had happened the night of the accident, and was able to recap just how high his blood alcohol count was. And he was able to make sure this judge had a true, accurate representation of who Mike was, a beloved father and pastor and husband and son, and the role that he played in our community. And he was able to take that and help this judge understand exactly what we lost that night. He actually read the letter to the judge that my daughter wrote, and I was able to read what I had written, and my sister-in-law read what she had written, and we really were able to help this judge understand who Mike was, and that he was a good man, and that it was tragic what happened. But I felt like because Mr. Lerner represented us, that he really took this interest in us and in our case, and that it wasn't just another case. I truly sometimes felt like ours was the only one. And if you ever find yourself in a position like that, you want to feel that way. You want to feel like that you're important and that you matter, and that what happened to you was not fair and it was unjust, and that to the best of their ability, he and his office were going to make sure that justice was served. And I felt that way. And what's amazing is even when the judge rendered his sentence, we went back to that same round table, and I don't really understand the way that the judge talks and how sentences come down in months. And so we sat down, and I said, so what happened? And we found out that he gave him time in the aggravated range, and we found out that he got time in the highest range possible, and we were able to get that without me putting my children through a trial, without me going through a trial, without putting my family through that. And the defendant was able to begin serving his time. We could begin the process of figuring out what this new life was going to be like for me and my family without Mike in it. And I look back to September till now, and I think of how much growth has taken place in our lives and how we've been able to let that rest when it would be possible that we were still in the process of continuances, and we would still be waiting for a trial date. And so those all things work together for the good for my family, because we were able to move forward. The defendant is able to move forward, start serving his time, and we can begin putting these things behind us. And I honestly believe, had this happened in another county, I don't think we would have had the same result. I don't think there would have been the same attention to detail. I don't think that, sometimes even the smallest loophole can make a difference in your case. And our case was followed through from beginning to end, through the investigators, through the highway patrol, through the people that worked at the DA's office. Everyone handled our case so professionally and would call me. If I ever called and left a message within a day, they responded back to me, making sure that I had all my questions answered, and it was done so professionally. I could not have asked for any better situation, and I mean that. I couldn't have asked for better representation for Mike. I couldn't have asked for people to have served us in a better way. And I hope that nobody ever finds themselves in a position that we did. It's by far the darkest days of our lives. But if you ever do find yourself in a position like that, where someone that you love was taken from you wrongly, whether it be at the hands of alcohol or for some other reason, just know that I have the utmost confidence and respect for Mr. Lerner and his office. And I know that personally, my case was handled in the best way possible. And that if you do ever find yourself in that position in a county where Mr. Lerner is, I know that he will do his very best to make sure that justice is served for you and your family, because that's exactly what he did for us.
I'm working every day to make your community a safer place to live, work, worship, and play. It is an honor and a privilege to serve as your elected district attorney. I'm asking for your vote on May 8th in order to continue serving you in that capacity. Thank you. This message was paid for by David Lerner for District Attorney.